Today we're talking about real-world web deployment. I'm glad everyone came out to join us this afternoon. The idea here is we're going to talk a little bit about web deployment, what goes into it, all the different aspects, facets, initiatives that you might come across building web solutions for clients, for employers, out in the real world. So I have a script here. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Full Sail University. My name is Name, and I am job title. My name is Chris Burke. I'm one of the department chairs here in our web program. I actually oversee all the web standards and usability courses. And then I have some very talented folks up here, both graduates and folks that work with us. And I'll let them introduce themselves. Let's start over here with Rick.
10. Ooh. Hi, I'm Rick Osborne. I'm the program manager for web design and development, and that just basically means I'm supreme overlord and I get to tell everybody what to do.
And my name is Steven Rivas. I'm an alumni from the Full Sail Web Design and Development program here. I have a small business that I run here in Orlando.
My name is Gus Hernandez. Ooh, I got a Barry White thing going on here. My name is Gus Hernandez. I have 14 years experience with interactive and print design. I'm currently a course director teaching in the web design and development degree, applied design tools, and interfaces.
Hi, my name is Richard Stovall. I work for a company called Lightmaker, doing mobile development, and I'm also a Full Sail alumni of the web design and development program.
So you get the idea. We have kind of a mixed group here, right? We have some people that are in-house, a program manager, course director dealing specifically with web solutions, and then a couple of our graduates that have gone through our program more recently. I guess to start, what can you guys say about your experience going through the program and how it relates to what you guys are doing at this point in the industry?
On the spot first, huh? Going through the program at Full Sail was probably one of the best things, actually arguably the best thing that I decided to do for my career. You meet a lot of really professional people, both teachers and alumni. And you don't really realize as much as you're learning until you get out there and someone says, hey, can you take this programming test? And you're like, are you joking? That's actually pretty easy. Thanks, Rick. So.
I don't know how many of you guys have had previous web experience, but I was one of the students that came through here that didn't have any web experience. I had no programming experience at all. So coming through the web development program was pretty much key for me. It pretty much taught me everything that I need to know. And it's been great, actually, because pretty much everything that I've learned here has been applicable to the job that I have now. So if you're kind of at that spot where you're thinking to yourself, you know, I don't have any experience, maybe you're in class with somebody that does have some experience, how are you going to fare out in the job world? The program really does prepare you very, very well to go out and to work in a production environment.
I'm not a student. Where did Burke go? Burke, what you got for us next?
Well, I just wanted to get a little bit of information as far as behind the scenes, right? What happens once you graduate and you have this this skill set, right? This bag of tools that you're going to work with, and then how you actually apply them or worked with them out in your respective fields right now, whether it be development, back-end development, front-end design and development, these types of ideas.
I'll try to keep this answer within a reasonable amount of time. I see there's 60 minutes on the clock there.
2 minutes, go.
There's a lot that happens behind the scenes. You know, as a business owner, you have the business side of things that you don't really have any idea what you're doing. Plus, you have to do the sales side, and you have to, you know, kind of wine and dine some of your clients, and then you have to actually go back and work. So, a typical work day for me and my colleagues is we wake up and we do email for a couple hours, and then we call people for a couple hours, and then we do sales for a couple hours, and then we get lunch, and then we work all night. And it's hard to kind of balance all of that, but you know, fortunately, like Richard said, they really do prepare you for all of that. So you're ready to do some of the pre-production, you're ready to do the back-end development and the front-end development, and then you're prepared for, you know, clients who just throw things at you, because they will. They're not sure what they're asking you to build, so they'll just say, hey, can you do this? And you're like, yes, I can. It's really more of a matter of time and, going on Stack Overflow or Google or wherever it is you're finding answers, figuring it out and then applying it. So
I think I have a little bit of an advantage over Steven in that since I'm working in a production environment, I don't actually have to deal with the client interaction or very much of the paperwork either. But I think I can give you at least a little bit of a story that recently happened at the company that I'm working for here. In case you do find yourself in the position of being a project manager or having your own business like Steven. We recently had a client, and the project manager was pretty loose with the paperwork that they did. And that kind of resulted in the project getting there was a lot of scope creep in it, about 3 months worth of scope creep, which translates to tens of thousands of dollars that we ended up losing. So, I would say that what Full Sail is doing for you, even though it may not seem like it at the time, when you're going through PPP and you're writing up paperwork and whatnot, is actually very, very applicable to what it is that you're probably going to be doing in the field. The project manager for that project ended up losing her job over it, since it was such a vast amount of money that we lost. So pay attention.
Let me ask some of the folks in the audience here today. How many of you guys are already doing some sort of web development, web design? A few hands.
Okay.
How many of you folks are currently attending Full Sail? A good amount of folks. How many people are recording arts? How many film? Nobody from film. Digital arts and design. A couple, anybody in our web program? A decent amount, even the guy in the back. It's an interesting thing that Richard's actually talking about right now is the idea of scope creep. I know some of you that aren't in our program who might not be familiar with the term. The idea that you have planned something ahead of time and said, we're going to deliver by this date, and we're going to deliver at this budget, at this price. When you start to develop things outside of scope, it's going to take more time and more money. So one of the questions that we had lined up was, talking a little bit about fine-tuning as well as the opinions involved in a project. So think about it. We're getting near a milestone, let's say, where we have to deliver something on time, again, to stay within the constraints of our budget as well as the time to deliver the overall project. At some point, you're going to either cut costs or you're going to have to cut the things that you're currently building, whether it be a feature set or part of the solution. So at that point, I would say that people's opinions come into play, right? As well as how well you fine-tune a particular feature or if you just shelf it for the time being, right? And you chalk it up as a nice-to-have feature that can make it into a future release. Yes?
Absolutely. One of the other things that I'll bring up real quick as well is I wondered when I was going through the program, how realistic is it to have this one project that you're given, and you usually have 2 or 3 weeks left in the class by the time you get your project to go ahead and build the project and get it out the door. It seemed very unrealistic to me at the time that I was in class. But the fact of the matter is that's actually a pretty decent amount of time. And a lot of the mobile projects that I've had have been 1 to 2 weeks, soup to nuts, the whole thing. So being in this environment that Full Sail provides, where you have one class a month and a relatively short period of time to do a project, is very, very applicable to the real world as well. In case you guys were wondering what it was going to be like in a production environment.
Do you want to go? All right. So my anecdote in this is we tell our web students, and I'm sure that like the RA students and some of the DAD students hear their own variation on this, but we tell our students all the time, make sure that you can get as many details up front as you possibly can, because the more details you get up front, the less chance you're going to have for scope creep or whatever you call it in the other programs. And my anecdote for this is I I used to work for an ISP, an internet service provider, and the ISP also provided web services to the local community because it was a small town, and there were like 2 web development firms in the entire town. And it was a lot of little mom and pop, I run an ice cream store kind of websites, these little $1,000, $2,000 projects, which I know $1,000 is like a couple of months rent for some of y'all, but $1,000 is like itty bitty little projects. And when you do that, what you end up with is, in order to make a business run, you end up with 30 or 40 or 50 of those size clients every single month. And if you can't sit down in a 4-hour meeting and figure out that this mom and pop shop doesn't want a website that just lists their location and has a map and all these sorts of things, but what they're expecting is that they're going to be able to sell 2,000 flavors of ice cream through their website, and they're going to be able to, they want to have a blog and they want to have a social media presence and da-da-da-da, and oh, by the way, they only want to pay $500 for it. If you can't get that in that first meeting, good night. You're going to go out of business real quick. So that would be my first anecdote for the day is talk as much as you possibly can up front, and it's going to be excruciating because you're going to sit in those meetings and you're going to be like, these people are crazy and they're boring and blah. But the more you can get out up front, the better.
Just to kind of add on and segue off of that, another thing to definitely be cognizant of when you guys do start working with projects is, depending again with the company that you work for, the company I worked with, the web services company, I wasn't just on one project the entire time. I was constantly at some points handling 2 to 3 projects, working with different clientele, different clients that the company had, because I was expected to remain billable. So if the project hit a certain standpoint, at a certain point here where it kind of stalled, there were 2 other projects I needed to kind of pick up. And in a lot of ways, I was having to work concurrently on all these different projects. So the ability to multitask and keeping yourself very organized is going to be extremely important once you get out in the industry, because at this point, a lot of it is going to be based on how well you can produce. And the more organized you are, the stronger you're going to produce.
I don't know if we want to keep kind of going with this thread or not, but yeah, I completely agree with these guys. I had a project last year. Actually, I think he's speaking at a couple events this year. And we originally just said, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a fixed budget, and it's going to be by phase. And there's 3 phases. And then if we want to add another phase, there's another phase. And that was almost as detailed as the bullet list was. So then phase 1, I found out later, is kind of, let's do this, and then let's do this, and then, hey, can we add this, and then can we add this? And I'd already agreed to a fixed budget. So I kind of got pigeonholed in a little bit. We made it through, and the project went off very well, but still, like Rick said, make sure you get as many bullet points as you can. Try to figure out, if you're managing multiple projects, how well you can do that, because it's going to be a really big thing for you later down the road.
I'll kind of segue off that here for a minute. Like I mentioned before, I kind of oversee usability courses in our web program. And it's kind of a hot topic these days, the idea of focusing on your users, your target audience. I think anybody in this room can relate to that, right? Anything that you design or build or shoot for our film people, you have to be concerned with the people at the other end, the people that are actually going to enjoy it, that are going to watch it, in our case in web, that are going to use it. Everything we do is interactive. DAD folks, you might not necessarily build something or design something that's interactive. Maybe it's just for an aesthetic to evoke an emotion. Film people, the same thing, right? You want to evoke some sort of emotion. Have people at the end of that movie, by the time they're done looking at that painting or that piece, by the time they're done interacting with this software, say, wow, that was nice. I like that. I'm going to use it again. I'm going to watch it again. I'm going to buy another piece from that artist, let's say. We can all work together in this regard. DAD people can build assets for web solutions, and film people can put together demo reels for software and all these types of things. The idea here is we're focusing on our users, the people at the other end. And we're talking about iterating and scope creep and phases within building things. How has usability, how has the focus of our place on our end users been evident in the things that you guys have done?
You should tell the story about that $300 hosting. Because that's a user user demographic fail?
For most of the work that we do, we've learned that a lot of our clients disregard usability and user experience because they're looking at a bottom line. And that's something that you kind of have to push them and kind of nurture them to. There's actually value there. We had a client project, it was a mobile project recently. We didn't really put a lot of marketing into how we were going to reach the end demographic, just who the end demographic was. You know, we knew what that user looked like on Facebook. Like, what did they use our app to do? We had a pretty large budget that carried us over 9 months of work. We built the app, we built the web servers, we did the design and the video and all of that. And then I think it was 2 to 3 months afterwards, we said, hey, we got 200 users using this, and here's your hosting bill to keep the app running. And it was like $300, and they were like, that's just not worth it. So we went through all of this work, and then at the end, we didn't get the usability per se to get our users engaged in it in the way that the client wanted. So they ended up losing out on the entire budget instead of just allocating a little bit more, thinking about how to get people to interact with the project better.
Once again, I kind of get to skip most of the design phase and the usability in my job. But what I have noticed is that it's important to kind of have a very good relationship and a very flexible relationship with the client, because the client often has kind of their own concept in their head about what it is that they want, what it is that they feel the app should look like, and how they feel the app should function. But you guys are the ones that are being professionally trained, and you guys are the ones that are aware of the concepts of usability, why a design is done the way that it is. So at some point, you're going to have to interact with the client and say, hey, I know that you kind of want it to look this way or to function this way, but if it functioned this way, it would be better. And you're going to have to explain why. You're going to have to explain to them some principle of usability. You're going to have to justify your reason. And it's going to be important because they'll shoot themselves in the foot otherwise. And they'll kind of take over the design and the usability process themselves, and then they'll end up with an app that doesn't perform the way that they want it to, and doesn't have the client base that they want it to, the user base. So that's kind of been my experience with it a little bit.
Just to kind of run off that point a little bit too, sometimes your role within, whether you're working freelance or you're working in a group, sometimes your role is going to be that of a teacher, right? And you're going to have to kind of explain to your client why maybe their approach, hopefully in a diplomatic way you could do this, but why their approach may not be the best way to actually help them succeed. And this is now where it can get a little tough, and this is again where understanding the rationale why is going to be something that's going to now help you articulate that point. Chris and I are both big evangelists when it comes to user testing. Something we've incorporated very heavily into our 2 courses right now in the WDDD program. One of the best ways, again, to now validate your decisions, your approach, is to actually user test, because ultimately we can have the nicest looking thing. You could have the most amazing code in the back powering the whole apparatus. But if it doesn't work according to the way users expect something to work, they won't use it. And at this point now, your application service is basically relegated to the dustbin of history in some ways.
We had a client once that, this was a couple of years back, she wanted to build a website to promote a politician, and it's not important who the politician was, but it was a minor level politician, and the client's dream for the website was that they were just basically going to sell swag to promote this politician. So they were going to sell T-shirts and buttons and backpacks and lanyards and all this sort of stuff. And on the surface, that sounds like a really good business model because, elections, everybody's always wearing all of those things, and you're like, this is going to be awesome. Except that it wasn't an election year. It was just that she wanted to promote the visibility of this particular politician. And except that when you really looked at the demographic of the user that would then be following this politician, they're not really big consumer types. And so having a website that sells to people that don't really buy anything doesn't really work. So in that way, it's you not only have to account for how your people are going to use stuff, but even just whether or not your people are going to use stuff. Like Stephen was saying, if you put a lot of money into this thing and you know exactly who your user is, but they're not going to do what you want them to do, you've already failed. So, yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point, and I think everyone in this room can relate to it, regardless of your program, right? Film and DAD. And it's a big trend in business these days. This idea of starting small, almost in an incubator type of a environment, and building what a lot of folks call as a minimum viable product. Think about it for film folks. You guys will do some sort of a trailer, right, to sell the film, and hopefully this trailer, entices people enough, gets enough interest to have a big opening weekend, right? Graphic design people, again, the same thing. You're trying to evoke some sort of emotion that hopefully sells a product or a brand. So it's important to kind of test your designs, A/B test them, whatever the case may be. But you start with this minimum viable product, this initial iteration, if you will. And then you change and you update it and you fix it until it gets to a point where people really love it. And it almost seems like stepping back a second, talking about an incubator type of an environment, that there should be some sort of a smaller group or team that works on these initiatives up front, right? Without distraction, without the politics involved, yet you're still working in teams. So can you guys talk to that effect? The idea of the importance, the pros and cons of collaborating in a team environment, and what happens politically in those types of discussions.
So speaking to that idea of a minimum viable product, the last company I worked for, they're a 200-year-old manufacturing company, and they wanted to update their web presence. They had a single website, an e-commerce site, that they had built back in the late 90s, and it was getting a little long in the tooth, and the functionality, people could still buy stuff, and it was okay, but it looked like it was designed in the 90s. And so the guy that was running the company at the time said, you know what, why buy one website when we can buy 10 for 10 times the price? And so he wanted to go out and build 10 different websites that showed off the different product lines and things like that. And so we put out an RFP, a request for proposal, so that we then had a whole bunch of companies come in and say, we want to build these 10 websites. One of the companies came in with an interesting technology stack, and if I say it, I'll get jeered at, so I'm not going to say what the technology stack was. But I happen to know for a fact that this technology stack was not going to work well against the database system that we were using at the time. But the people that were selling it, because it was a really high dollar figure, so it was a very enticing project for a lot of local companies, the people that were selling it were really, really passionate on selling it, and they really, really believed that their team could do absolutely anything that they put their minds to. So very much like these two gentlemen right here that want to believe that they can accomplish anything. But the unfortunate thing is that this technology stack, there was just no way to make it work. But we said, you know what, we'll give you a chance. Maybe there's a slight chance that you can pull this thing off. So all that we need you to do is we'll give you access to our database server, just pull up a list of products and show them to us on a page. Here's the database tables, here's the whole thing, go to town. And we gave them 3 months to do this. And anybody who's been through any of the web courses knows that that's like an afternoon project, not a 3-month project. 3 months. And in 3 months, they come back around and they're like, we're ready to show it to you. And so great, we pull up the demo, and it loads, and it loads, and it loads. 3 minutes later, a list of 20,000 products comes up on the screen. So our first question was A, why did it take 3 minutes? And B, who in their right mind tries to list 20,000 products on a screen? Needless to say, that company did not get the contract. We went with another company. But the whole point here being that all that we wanted was that idea of a minimum viable product, and they failed that. So when your client, or when your people come to you and they say, we just need this one little thing. Don't do all the other stuff that you want to do that you think is amazing. Just do the one little thing, because that's really all that you need.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit of a devil's advocate, like against the lean startup or the incubator. And there's a couple reasons why. You'll learn this as soon as you graduate. You're going to get about 500,000 different calls. Everybody has the next Facebook idea, and I just need you to work like for a couple weeks for free. And then you're going to get a really big check once we're going to sell it to the venture capitalist. You're going to make a lot of money. Just a little work for free for first. And it starts out, it sounds really amazing. They almost never work out because everybody does have the idea, but nobody ever cares about everybody else's idea, and they never care enough to adapt and just do like the first little step. There's a really good video out there that I recommend that you guys all watch. It's by Mike Monteiro. I can't really say the title that we're on film, but it's blank you pay me. And it's something that you guys as developers, you're gonna have to learn to kind of take care of yourselves. Unless it's your dream, unless you're the one that's gonna be selling the 70, 80% shares later, and it's your passion and you're the one that's okay eating ramen, don't take just little checks and little, like, hey, we'll put you in a little room here and just work for real low pay, if at all, we'll pay you later. Make sure that you're protected. Don't let somebody else kind of try to get you, because you're the expert and the developer, to carry them to their dreams. And that's just my take on some of the lean startups. They do work. Some of them are very successful, and if that's something you want to get into, just make sure you do it, kind of think about things a little bit first.
To kind of run off this point, never work for free. That's basically my motto. You guys are putting a lot of time, effort, and in some ways a lot of financial obligations you've gotten yourself into in order to get this education. So never work for free, right? This wasn't given to you, so you shouldn't give away your services. Now, to kind of talk about kind of what Rick touched on a little bit, sometimes, again, you're going to have to deal with a lot of the politics in terms of kind of how the organization's structured. Sometimes you'll have certain leadership types that are very much about force of personality. That's their opinion. This is how they're going to run. And at those points, you just have to kind of, in some ways, go with the flow and speak, say your opinion, speak up for your knowledge, but, go with the flow. I can remember one particular incident where we kind of got caught in a crossfire like that, doing a job for a certain financial institution in Alabama. Got caught in this crossfire. There was an internal disagreement. And if any of you guys have ever seen Cops, right, the show Cops, whenever the police officer shows up to a domestic disturbance dispute, what happens? Usually the two people that are fighting now start going against the cop, right? So the same thing was going to happen here if we spoke up. So we just kind of kept our cool, and eventually we came to an agreement as to, all right, let's go ahead and let them set up their proof of concept, and then we'll see now where we can go from there. Well, 2.5 weeks later, after they said it was going to be about a week, they called us back and they said, hey, listen, we're just going to run with your guys' idea. Again, we didn't have to do anything here extraordinary to get them to come to our way of thinking. We just let them kind of hash it amongst themselves, and that's sometimes the best thing you can do. Don't open your mouth. Just let them fight internally, because they will turn on you if you do speak up and say the wrong thing.
I think everyone's good. It's a really good point that I like to stress again, is this idea that, a lot of times, even myself doing freelance work, you're going to find that you guys know a lot more than some of your clients, maybe even some of your employers. You have this massive skill set by the time you get out of your program, right? And, as you're probably already seeing, these programs aren't easy. I mean, we're cramming a ton of information in every month to the point to get you guys ready for what to expect. And panels like this are designed to do the same thing, to give you some, insight, some firsthand conversational advice as to what to expect. But the idea here is, know that you have a wealth of information, here, up in your head. And do your best to educate your employers, your clients, as to the best way or the right way or the better way to go about doing whatever it is, whether it be shooting a scene or building a piece, an asset, some digital asset, or some web solution.
In that vein, if I may.
Sure, I was going to talk the importance of iteration, because...
Before we get that, I have one more anecdote for you.
Sure.
Because
One more.
I love telling my anecdotes. I could do the Kamehameha? Right, there it is. There. For the camera, the Kamehameha. All right. So it's really, really easy because I know not everybody in here is a web developer, but it's really easy for us web developers to fall into this trap of, I know all the things and I come from the internet, therefore I'm always the smartest person in the room. And in a lot of cases that's true. But in a lot of cases, that's a trap. And it's easy to fall into this idea that the client is always dumb. You iconify the client doesn't know what they really want, the client doesn't know how to communicate what they want even if they know what they want, blah, blah, blah. It's not always the case. So my anecdote here is, again, working for that ISP that I worked for, we had for those little itty bitty websites, we would set them up with a service agreement where every month they would get X hours of work for free, 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever it was. And the intent of that was that we could do little maintenance on their site, update graphics, update banner ads, update content if they weren't tech savvy enough to be able to update their own content, whatever it was. And that worked out really, really well because it was a recurring revenue stream, which was, awesome. Recurring revenue, people that just pay you to sit around and not do anything. It was great. But we had one client who was a really savvy dude. He didn't know how to run a business, but what he figured out was that if he came to us and said, I need this one little thing this month, he would be able to figure out how to break off just one little piece of what he needs so that he could get in just under that level of that service agreement so that he wouldn't have to pay the $150, $175 an hour above that. And so he would break what he wanted up into these little itty-bitty tasks. And it was really, really smart from his perspective because that meant that he was just paying his hosting fee and he wasn't having to pay the overages. But the business owner at the time was, needless to say, not too happy about this because after a couple of months of us working on this one client's projects, for 2, 3, 4 hours a month or whatever it was, and the client isn't paying those overage fees, he's got us working at very expensive rates that he then can't bill back to the client. So he starts to get really unhappy about it, to the point that the client relations ended up deteriorating and the business owner and the client sort of parted ways. But the intent there being that clients are not always dumb. The clients may not know how to communicate as effectively as you have been trained to communicate, but that doesn't mean that they're dumb.
Yeah, they're looking at their dollars. How many of you folks in this room have taken a class or maybe outside of school been exposed to contracts? Maybe had to write some, had to look at some, had to sign some? Yeah? What can you guys share for these folks regarding the importance of contracts in protecting yourself as well as protecting the interests of the project?
Read the fine print. Seriously, I could tell you one particular story where basically because I didn't do that. I did not read the fine print, and it came back to haunt me in a really, really bad way because it was very much like the client Rick was just talking about. The client was able to use some of the fine print against me to get free work for. And because I didn't actually take the time to read that, I was now pretty much engaged for the next year. So again, I just cannot emphasize enough. Take the time to read it. And if you feel like the legalese is just too overwhelming for you to actually understand, pay the money and have a lawyer look at it. It will save you a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money in the long run.
How granular should you get with a contract? That might be a good question. I know some people in the room will say, yeah, contract, I get what it is, and there's a whole bunch of text on it, and I know I need to read the fine print, right? Well, how fine print should we get? How granular should you get with a contract as far as specifying what's going to happen and who's going to get paid and when things are going to get done?
I get a really simple answer for that. You don't worry about that. You pay somebody to worry about that. Just like you web developers or you RA folks, you are experts in your area. You don't know anything about the law. You may think you know stuff about the law because you see stuff on Reddit and Slashdot and all these other sorts of things, and you're like, dude, I totally got this. I got a Wikipedia page. No, you don't have any idea about the law because the law is not just what you hear about on CNN, and it's not just what you hear about on Reddit and things like that. The law starts at the national level, and then you've got state laws, and then you've got county laws, and then you've got city laws, and they're all different because nobody can agree on anything. So the simple answer is don't do any of that. Make a lot of money so that you can pay somebody to worry about that for you.
Yeah, and I would just say, I agree with what Rick's saying. Have somebody else, pay them, or have, if you have lawyer friends, have them at least look at it. I think the contract really applies more to the size of the project. You get more granular the bigger the project is. If you're putting up a splash page for somebody, it's probably not going to need a 25-page contract. It's a splash page. But just make sure that it's applicable, and pay attention when people do talk about contracts, because I can tell you one thing for sure. People with money want contracts. People with no money don't want contracts. So if you don't ever do contracts and you're working on projects that don't ever need them, you're not going to get a $15,000 check. You're probably going to get a $500 check.
I can give you actually kind of a recent example as far as how the contracts go. I'm going to be a little vague because I'm not sure how much of it I'm supposed to talk about. But my company actually recently lost a contract worth about $2.6 million. And there is an ensuing legal battle between us and the clients.
Please tell us more.
Lightmaker only makes about $6 million a year with roughly about $800,000 worth of profit. So that's a huge blow. But the reason that the company didn't go under was because of the contract. They were very, very good about the contracts that they had with all of their clients. And they were very protected against a lot of the things that the client wanted to do or felt that they had the right to do, I guess, when we lost that contract. That contract made the difference between Lightmaker USA staying in business and going bankrupt. So please don't give that less importance than it deserves. Conversely, I had a friend who graduated at the same time as I did, who's now on his third job. His first job, they didn't have that kind of protection, lost a client, and ended up firing a large portion of the office because they could no longer afford to keep them there. So I'm not sure if I would say that getting too nitty-gritty with a contract is even possible. I would say the more that you fine-tune it or the more that you get a professional to fine-tune it for you, the better. Because it could very well make the difference between your business going under or your business being successful.
I just had one more thing to add to that. So contracts are tricky, and they're kind of like software in that the more pieces and parts you have for them, you think you're nailing things down more and more. But as we know with software, the more pieces and parts you add to a piece of software, the harder it is to make sure that they all work together correctly. Because a contract, like a piece of software, is really a whole document, and all the pieces have to work together for the contract to be valid. And there are some contracts where you can redline out single paragraphs and things like that, but those are few and far between, and they don't really do so well in legal battles. So when you get a client, the client is going to come at you with a lot of terms in the contract that say, you must provide this, and this is your deadline, and this is the quality of communication that we expect, and da-da-da-da. So they're gonna have a lot of the things that you have to do. So if you do nothing else when you worry about the contracts, make sure that you put in the exact same onus on the client to deliver the exact same things. Make sure that the contract states you will deliver your marketing collateral, you will deliver your web copy, you will communicate with us once a week, you will follow our change process if we have a change process. You won't just email us and say, hey, we want it blue. You go through the ticket system or whatever that is. You need to put all of that stuff in the contract. And yeah, by all means, put in everything you can possibly think of in there and then hand it to the lawyer and have the lawyer do the rest.
And this will be a really good segue to, I know what Chris wants to talk about next, but in the contract, always make sure you have you account for iterations in a lot of ways, because you can get held up in this constant iterative phase, and if your contract hasn't actually covered that, you could be doing a lot of free work endlessly until they finally decide what they like. So again, plan for an iterative phase. Make sure you have some kind of process that you're going to follow that, hey, the first 2 changes, okay, there'll be no charge, but anything over that, now there's going to be a certain per hour charge incurred. Again, what you're trying to do with this contract is not beat the client down, you're basically just protecting yourself. And the contract exists to keep everybody honest.
Yeah, I would imagine that, when you get into this portion of dealing with clients, where the contract phase here can, make or break the project, can make or break the budget, but how about also the rapport, the relationship between you and the client? Getting too granular and people's feelings maybe get hurt, or they feel like they're being nitpicked too much, or maybe the other way around. They felt that you weren't following protocol, like you mentioned a ticketing system. If you have a change order, something needs to change in the scope of the project, so is it okay just to email and say, hey, we want this blue now, or is there some protocol or process in place to assure that the lines of communication stay open and they're effective so that things don't fall between the cracks, so to speak? As we continue to, as Gus was mentioning, iterate on our project or our product. What is the importance, do you guys think, when it comes to iterating in terms of scalability, okay? Having the ability to finalize a product or at least a process that will scale gracefully.
In my experience, I talk a lot, for those of, well, I talk a lot in general, but I talk a lot about this concept of the illusion of choice. A lot of people have heard me say this a lot, and I'm a big proponent in it, in that all of the web companies that I've worked for that have been successful always provide the client with the illusion of choice. And what that means is every client is different, and just like every person here is different. And so for one client, it may be really, really appropriate that you spend a lot of time building a great management back end so that when you deliver the final product, they're then basically taking it over and they're running it from then on and they're just paying you hosting fees. But for another client, they may not want to touch any of that administrative stuff. And it may be worth it to them to just pay you the $150, $200 an hour to go in to that text area and make those changes, or to go into some management backend and upload some new image or something like that. Never underestimate what the client is willing to spend. And that really touches on iteration, because that maintenance phase of a project is where a lot of the iteration comes in. A lot of projects are done with a style where you say, okay, let's get through phase one, let's get you into a maintenance phase, and then while we're in that maintenance phase, let's work on speccing out what phase two is going to be. Well, that's all easy to say, but what exactly is that maintenance phase entail? Does it entail changes, or do we freeze the code base? Does it entail us uploading and changing content and not necessarily changing code, but going in through the management interface and doing all that? Or is the expectation on the client to do those things? And there's no right answer there, but you need to figure out what makes sense for the client. And where the illusion of change comes in is when you're a small startup company, maybe you make the decision that that $150 an hour that somebody wants to pay you to type into a text box is totally worth it because it's $150 an hour.
How much an hour?
Yeah.
I can charge how much an hour?
Yeah, totally.
Write that down.
But maybe the other way around. Maybe you have so many concurrent clients at the same time, like Gus was talking about. Maybe you're working on 3 and 4 and 5 projects at the same time. So the idea of spending an hour of your day typing data into a text box when the client could do it just as easily, maybe you say, you know what, we're going to charge you $250 an hour to do that because it's not worth our time, and we know that there's no way you're ever going to pay $250 an hour. But that's that illusion of choice. The client has the choice of paying that. You know that it's totally an illusion because there's no way that they're going to do it. But quite frankly, if they pay $250 an hour for you to type into text box, I challenge anybody in here to say no to do that. Even I would do that, so, you know.
Yeah, we do have a illusion of choice that we apply at our company, actually. We offer hosting mostly because I know if I have the administrator password to the server, if anything goes wrong, I have the administrator password to the server. If they go to GoDaddy, I got to get on the phone with GoDaddy or whoever it is that they go to. I got to figure out, did you save your password? Who's got it? Where do I go? What's the server environment? Who's in control here? What permissions do I have? So $15 a month, you can get your website, your WordPress blog or whatever hosted with us, and that's $180 a year, and all the small businesses go, it's $45 a year at GoDaddy. I'm not going to do that. And you're like, okay, cool. You can go ahead and deploy it to GoDaddy. That's fine. Anytime anything goes wrong, though, our rates are $75 an hour, and it's a minimum hour and a half for us to deal with them. And they kind of do the math in their head too. I think the better choice here is to go with your hosting. And I'm like, yeah, I totally agree. So, but in terms of iteration, I agree. Just make sure that you don't get caught in that, the phase example. If you don't have your bullet points out and you can't ever put a clear end point to anything, then you're going to be iterating over and over and over and over. And it seems really easy to they call you, and sometimes it's just easier to say, yeah, I'll make the background blue because I don't want you to go fill out a ticket, and the project manager is going to come make sure I do it, and I have to file a report. I'm just going to change the hex code. But, I think all of the points that we're going to make here today are always going to boil down to pay attention at the beginning so that you don't have to pay attention at the end. So everything's defined up front, and you're good to go.
See, the thing about iterations, a lot of people tend to look at it, especially students, they see it as almost like, oh, I got to make this change. I got to make this change. And it really, in a lot of ways, iterations are what's helping you define a better product. I've worked on some projects where we had no time period for iteration. But then conversely, I've worked on other projects where we spent 2.5 months just in wireframe HTML prototypes. Again, certain companies have different approaches. Ultimately, the way you guys should look at iterations is this is what's helping me fine-tune the product that I'm creating. The better the product is, the more traction it's going to actually gain. So don't look at iterations as like, oh, this horrible thing you guys have to do. Take the time to do it, because the more time you spend processing, the more time you spend iterating, the better the product's going to be in the long run.
That's actually hard. It's hard not to see it as, oh, God, the client's coming back and they want us to do this and this and this. But I'll tell you, probably 80 to 90% of the projects at Lightmaker are iterative projects from the beginning. The client comes to us with some kind of idea in their head about what they need in the next 2 weeks and then what they want over the next 2 months. And it's a process. We have a lot of maintenance contracts as well where, we just kind of have a steady client, and we do work for them. We iterate the site. We improve the site, upgrade it constantly throughout the year. Even the projects that do have some kind of set deadline are usually iterative in that the client is looking for something to release in a relatively short period of time, but is also looking to come back and add something into the app or improve the app in some way in the future. So I think regardless of whether you like it or not, it's just something that you're going to have to deal with, I think, regardless of whether you're working in an industry or whether you own your own business.
Is it smart to put everything up front? We heard a little bit about this a minute ago. The idea of doing all the planning up front and maybe getting that approved, and then moving on to the next phase, designing stuff, getting that approved, and then moving on again and developing it. What happens if we fold a bunch of letters? We fold all 1,000 letters, and then we go to stuff the first one in the first envelope, and we realize it doesn't fit. Do we lose a lot of time? Is it smart to do all the planning up front? Do you guys tend to do that? Or do we take a different approach that says, let's touch all aspects or facets of the project simultaneously, working concurrently from the beginning, and then make changes to every aspect along the way?
A lot of my background, we dealt with what's called the waterfall approach, which is pretty much exactly what you were just elaborating on.
Explain that.
Right. Basically, we have a concept phase where the project's getting fleshed out conceptually. Then we have a design phase where we're now designing screens to kind of support the use case explained in the concept. Then we hit production where it's actually built out, and then there's a QA or testing period before it actually gets handed over. One of the things that was really interesting as I did some of these projects, some of them actually worked in this manner, and they actually worked okay. But others, once we now got past the design phase and into production, and we started, or maybe as far as down as testing, we started realizing that certain assumptions we had made at the beginning didn't really pan out. And so in a lot of ways, I used to be felt very strongly about the waterfall approach, and I felt that this methodical process really helped to find a good product. Last 4 or 5 years, though, I have actually really come around to the agile way of thinking, which is developing in sprints, because, again, it's extremely hard to identify correctly how use is going to actually take place unless we've actually tested. So we could have these defined ideas of what we think the way the project or the way the product will work, but now once we actually put it in front of users, oh wow, look at this, they've found all kinds of different ways to break it, or they're using it in ways that we didn't intend for them to do. Maybe they're getting hung up on certain visual cues. Maybe they're expecting certain functionality that they've encountered in different applications and they think it's going to happen here. Again, it's extremely hard to pinpoint a lot of that if we follow that very segmented waterfall approach. This is why I, in a lot of ways, some of the more successful projects I've worked on recently have been, we kind of define loosely what it is. We start building a lot of prototypes that just kind of test use and really solidify the use. And once we've now hit that milestone where we're pretty confident in terms of the workflow, we now move on to start to do some of the more visual components, like we start dealing with aesthetics, and just kind of produce the project from there on out.
Yeah, at the company that I work with, we do a lot of agile development, which is kind of the opposite of the waterfall. I think in general, the world we live in today tends to want to be more agile. Business back in the 50s, if you were going to kind of take a brand new concept like a Kirby vacuum or something like that, it's very concrete, it's new, and it's something that nobody's ever done before. So you can do a waterfall thing because there's no kind of adaptation or anything like that. Whereas today, we work with a lot of technologies that feel really new, but they're really not. We're reinventing the wheel over and over and over, and we have to kind of test, like, does it work the way we wanted it to here, and did we make enough change this way? So I think that the agile development works best for projects that need to be kind of like a living, breathing, changing project. If your requirements are set in stone and your product's not going to change, the user has to click this submit button. Like, there's no agile there. That they have to do that, so that's step one. So just kind of try to get a feel for what it is you're building. Are you building something kind of concrete and linear, or are you building something that's going to need to roll with some punches?
Let me ask you guys a question about it, because the technical director at the company that I work for is also a very strong proponent for agile development, but most of our development is done in the waterfall method because it's very difficult to sell agile to a client, it seems like. They seem to prefer the waterfall method where there's something very concrete that's laid out. So I guess I'm wondering, outside of my own perspective, is that something that you found that type of development to go over well with the clients?
I think there's really two questions there. And the first question is it okay to mix Agile and Waterfall? And then the second question is, how do we then sell Agile to a client? So I'll take the second part first. How do we sell Agile to a client? I find that Agile is really easy to sell to a client when you put it in terms of that minimum viable product that we were talking about before. Because the nice thing about Agile is instead of, let's put it this way. The bad thing about Waterfall is that if you sit there and you say, okay, we know that this is going to be a 6-month project, and oh, by the way, here is the $75,000 project for that, or sticker price for that next 6 months. That's a lot of sticker shock. $75,000, especially if you're a small business owner, is not a small chunk of change. So if you can come at them and you can say, okay, we could do it this way, or what if you pay us on a month-by-month basis? And so we take that 6 months, and that ends up being, $12 grand a month. And we say, instead of worrying about $75,000, why don't we just worry about the first 12 and a half? And we'll get to that minimum viable product stage. And if you don't like it, you walk away. And you've only spent 12 and a half grand instead of 75 grand. And that's a really big deal, especially when you add in the extra little piece of, and oh, by the way, you take everything that we built with you if you go. And that's a really powerful thing to say to a client, because the client doesn't know what to do with that source code. You're just going to give them a zip file, and they're going to be like, I don't know what to do with this. But they also know that they can then take that, especially when if you've won the contract on an RFP, so if there were a number of other companies competing to get that same business, they know that, hey, they're only in so far, and then all that rest of that stuff they can take to the next guy if they decide that they don't like you. That's a really easy sell, I have found, for a client. You just break it up into little pieces. That works for agile. It also means, as a business owner, as the Lightmaker or the Zeunic or whatever, that means you're going to get paid at the end of the month. You'll find that the longer a project goes before you get paid, the less likely it's going to be that you're going to get paid. And it doesn't matter how big that sticker price is. The longer you wait to get paid, the more likely that a client is going to come to you and say, you know, I didn't like the fact that it was blue instead of red, so I want my $75,000 back. Right, okay, so that's the second part of the question. The first part of the question is, can Agile and Waterfall work together? I'm a big believer in the fact that they absolutely cannot. I think that you really have to commit to one or the other. You either have to commit to that very detail-oriented approach up front, where you literally sit down and for 2 hours you discuss the fact that the background is going to be cornflower blue instead of teal, whatever. But you do all that up front, and then you walk away from that, and then we get to go build stuff. Or you come at it the other way, and you say, the very first thing we're going to build for you is this thing, and that's all that we're going to worry about. We're not going to worry about the background color. We're not going to worry about this. We're not going to worry about that. But when you start mixing those things, and you say, we're going to gather requirements as if it were waterfall, and then we're going to work in an agile development environment, or you go the other way around, and you say, we're going to gather requirements as if they're agile, but we're going to treat it in a waterfall development way, all hell breaks loose, and madness ensues. Dogs and cats start living together. It's crazy. So I say don't do it.
Yeah, I think, again, it largely depends on your client. An easy way for me to gauge which way they would like us to work with them is kind of based on how they want to interact with me. You know, if you break the steps into, say, content, design, and development, and you tell a client, like, if we're going to do it waterfall, you have to go get all the content first. And the client might be like, yeah, great, like we have it, or we'll get back to you in a month and then we'll do design. And they might, you know, that's their process. But some of the people that you work with might be like, well, I got some meetings this week and I got to go here, and I'll work on the content, but can you do the design? And then you get to that phase and you say, okay, we're ready to get the designs almost done, but we also started development. And some of them think that's great because they know I don't have to approve the design before development can start. I don't have to finish content before design can start because I'm working, you know, you guys are kind of rolling with my schedule. And other companies, you know, are going to say, no, here's the content, here's the design, here's the development, because they want, you know, for their enterprise or whatnot, it may be that's just how they need to work.
Not to be the contrarian here, but there's been a couple projects where we kind of did mix the waterfall agile approach, and primarily waterfall in terms of defining what it was going to do. And we did take a little bit of time to kind of really flesh it out, did a couple of task flow diagrams to make sure that we're accounting for the steps that they were anticipating. And so we did spend a little bit of the time with that, but then when we actually started building things out, it was all more like sprint-driven now at this point. Okay, for this phase, we're going to build this component out. We're going to build this process out. And then from there, the second phase and so forth. So again, not trying to be the contrarian, it kind of really depends on your client in a lot of ways, simply because my experience, some clients really don't like the word prototypes. And when we're dealing with Agile, we're dealing with a lot of prototypes at first. And so when they're thinking finished product, but when they think prototype, oh, you still don't know how you're going to do this? And they don't understand the value of what the prototype brings. So again, it's how you sell it, how you pitch it, and how you now turn any negatives they may have into positives that are now going to help reinforce your position.